It's so wonderful to see so many people here in real life and also on Zoom. My name is Cilla. I'm Head of Equality, Diversity Inclusion at Sanger, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome today, on behalf of our campus-wide Equality in Science programme, two phenomenal women, Julia Gillard and Cilla Snowball. Julia Gillard was the 27th Prime Minister of Australia and the first and only woman to serve in that role. Since leaving office, Julia has dedicated her time to advocacy, governance roles and writing. In 2021, Julia was appointed Chair of Welcome, and she's also the founder and inaugural Chair of the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London and Chair of its sister institute at the Australian National University. So welcome, Julia. And also, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome Dame Cilla Snowball. So Cilla joined the Wellcome Board of Governors in 2019. Cilla has had an illustrious career in advertising and has held many impressive positions, including chairing the Women's Business Council, the Great Private Sector Council, and we are absolutely delighted that Cilla also sits on our GRL board and is our EDI champion. So welcome, Cilla.
Firstly, Julia, tell us why you joined the Wellcome Board and what made you pursue a career now in science. What was the attraction of Wellcome?
What really attracted me to joining Wellcome is I'm someone who's always believed that evidence matters, science matters, and that public policy goes very, very wrong when it isn't centred on evidence and science. And in my own political career, I'd been through a number of quite scarring debates, one of which was around climate change and us introducing an economy-wide emissions trading scheme in Australia, and that became hostage to all sorts of drama and carry-on, with much of that drama and carry-on being a repudiation of climate science. So I knew what it looked like when it went wrong, and I thought that Wellcome, with its ambitious new strategy, was an organisation that could fund science, which was groundbreaking, you know, humanity changing, but it could also speak loudly into the world about the importance of science being at the centre of a lot of public policy decision making. So that really enthused me to join.
You spoke at the Simmons Leadership Conference and stated that if you're really passionate about something and raise your voice, you can make a difference. The question is how people from minoritized backgrounds can best achieve this.
Well, I may not be the best person to answer that, but I, you know, from my own life experience, I do know by shining a spotlight on injustice or something that was wrong, that you could make a difference to it. I think for minoritized communities, that is much, much harder, because having access to shining that spotlight, having the entree to be accepted, believed, responded to is not the same. But hopefully we're increasingly in a world and in the communities that we're trying to bring together in the research community, we're in a stage where people are more prepared to understand and accept that, and more prepared to diffuse the power.
Yeah. Let's move on to 10 years ago, 10 years and 2 weeks ago, when you stood up in our equivalent of question time and gave Prime Minister's questions, you call it question time, don't you? And gave the very famous misogyny speech. How do you reflect back on that speech and that moment now?
If you'd said to me then, we'll still be talking about it 10 years later, I would have just thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And yet here we are. And I think that's because, you know, it's become divorced from that parliamentary day, and it's come to represent for women in particular who are still navigating a very gendered world, a time when the gendered nature of the world was called out, and called out very sharply. And I think as long as we're still navigating this gendered world, then it will continue to play that kind of role.
Generally speaking, do you think stick is more effective than carrot? in addressing gender inequality?
There is a role for sitting comfortably in our anger, because there are things that we're entitled to feel angry about, and we shouldn't just try and push that to one side. But you don't get change by just sitting comfortably in the anger.
Yeah.
You get change because you then channel that energy into a forward agenda, and that ultimately does require you to find the skills and capacities to persuade people and to bring them on the journey with you. Here at Sanger, at Welcome, we're still thinking these things through. I mean, because, you know, how do you measure, see, hold to account, encourage, develop ideal ways of working, compared with having complaints mechanisms, which is in some ways a lot easier. That doesn't mean it's easy, but, you know, I think we're all more familiar with those structures about if people raise a complaint, then it needs to be dealt with and needs to be dealt with in a timely way. Sometimes there's a gap between us knowing we should do that and actually getting it done. But I think that's a clearer pathway than how do we educate and nurture the more ideal behaviours, and we're still working on that. I think you're still working on that.
One of the questions we had from the audience was the quote in your book that reckons it's going to take 94 years to address gender inequality globally. What can we do to do it in 4 years or in 4 days? How can we accelerate it?
Gender inequality, I think, is one of those areas people think they know. And so a lot of things get resourced which actually aren't impactful, and then people get frustrated and it all gets a bit messy, and then it's, you know, perilously close to being put in the too hard basket because we tried. So I think it's the combination of we're definitely going to do this, and we're definitely going to find the most evidence-based, impactful ways of doing it. And we're not going to shy back if it's harder than perhaps we thought at the start. And I think for many organisations right now, we're in that harder bit. Most people have done the completely obvious stuff. So we're in that harder bit, and we need the evidence of what best works, but we can't flag in will to do it. You know, when we look in all sorts of ways at societies about who has the levers of power in their hands, it's still disproportionately men. And so whilst progress is being made, and we should take a lot of heart from that progress, there's still a lot more to do. And of course, gender, as we've been discussing, gender is one form of diversity. It's not the only form of diversity. And when we turn to other forms of diversity, we're often seeing, you know, results that are lagging behind even the gender changes.
The last main question is about how we tackle research culture in science and academia to make it healthier. Welcome's done a lot of work on research culture. I know there's lots of work being done here. How can we best address those challenges?
Yeah, I think we're still learning on how best to address these challenges, and thankfully I think we're learning together. Welcome and Sanger, we're learning together. I think we increasingly are clear on what is unacceptable. The days, I think, of the you know, genius from whom all sorts of toxic behaviours are tolerated in the name of genius, I think those days are behind us, and I think we all recognise now that the toxicity overwhelms the genius, that genius is often a loaded term applied to some and not others in any event, and that the best science is the more diverse, inclusive science. And that, you know, is a pathway Welcome is knowingly walking down. I mean, when we say we're there to, you know, help solve the urgent health challenges for all of humanity, either you meant all or you didn't mean all. But if you meant it, then, and we do mean it, then it has to take you in the direction of the most inclusive research culture. Otherwise, you can't possibly crack the for all of humanity part. And so, you know, I think that's where we're stepping to now, where, you know, the value that is put on inclusion and diversity is much higher and much more obvious and held to account than it used to be.